Welcome everybody to Collaborative Learning with Google. I am Barb Vinyl. I am moderating your chat today, and I want to introduce Melanie Farrell, who is our host for today's session, and our special guest, Paul Cancellieri, and I'm really hoping I said it correctly, Paul. We are really looking forward to the learning that he's going to share with us today, and I will continue to drop the link to the slide deck in the chat. If you have any questions, please do ask them in the chat, we have a small group, so if you need to unmute at the end and ask questions, we will hang around. So thank you for being here, and Melanie, go ahead.
All right, thanks Barb, and welcome everyone. If you're joining us synchronously, thank you for joining us during your lunchtime, and if you're joining us asynchronously, we welcome you as well. So today we're talking about collaborative learning with Google. This is a very exciting topic. As Barb said, we are here today with Paul as a special guest. Myself and Barb will be moderating the chat, so feel free to put any questions that you have there in the chat. Today, a part of our focus is on the NC Digital Learning Standards for students. These are standards that were adopted by North Carolina this past year, and today all of these are part of our focus. If you want more information about these North Carolina Digital Learning Standards for students, in our slide deck is a link for you to click on, and this image is also a link that will take you to more information about these standards. So our learning goals today, we have two learning goals that we're going to focus on. The first one is comparing group work versus collaboration. And the second one is exploring ways to offer opportunities for students to reach learning goals by collaborating using Google tools. So last week's Lunch and Learn was, last March 10th, was the focus on last week was defining collaboration and exploring protocols used for collaboration. So this week we are focusing in more on how to do that, and that's why we've asked Paul to be here. As a classroom teacher, we wanted to make sure his perspective is the one that you're hearing mostly from. And if you want more information about really digging into what collaboration is and the protocols, feel free to go back to last week's Lunch and Learn and watch that 30-minute Lunch and Learn as well. So this definition of collaboration comes directly from a Wake County document on collaborative protocols. I'm going to pause here just for a minute so you can read this. I feel like this definition does a really nice job in just defining what collaboration is. So part of this slide and this quote is really thinking about collaboration, and in this virtual environment that we have mostly been in for almost a year, collaboration, you really have to build for collaboration. There are a lot of pieces to making sure that there's trust involved, there are relationships involved, there's feedback. So it can be very complicated, and it doesn't just happen overnight. And like this slide reminds us that it must be taught and practiced. So today that is what we're going to be focusing on. And this is taken directly from our strategic plan. So why is collaboration important? Again, there are skills that we want our graduates to be able to walk away with, and collaboration is one of them. And then this slide here, group work versus collaboration. This just does a little bit more defining the difference between group work and collaboration. Our focus today, like I said, is on collaboration, but I don't want to discount that group work also is not important, because it is. but it is different than collaboration. So sometimes we have projects that lean more towards group work where students can work independently reaching the same goal, and then collaborative work where they have to really depend on each other to reach that goal. So today we are focusing on collaborative learning. All right, so this collaborative project, I reached out to Paul, a classroom teacher, an 8th grade teacher, and I said, would you be willing to work on a project with me? And he said, okay, sure. And I asked him to think through a time back in the brick and mortar times of a project or a topic or a learning goal that he would have really leaned into a collaborative effort with his students, and to bring that learning goal to our conversation so that we could collaborate together on a project where his students would then collaborate, and what would it look like in a virtual environment. So this collaborative project was a collaboration between myself as the DLC and Paul as the 8th grade science teacher, and we wanted to share this project with you. But before we share it, I want you to be thinking about, if you're not an 8th grade science teacher, how can some of these parts of this project, how could you maybe bring in some of these parts or one of these parts? Because we're going to go through lots of different pieces of this project. And this project can and might feel somewhat overwhelming because there are so many pieces to it. But if you could really come in with an open mind, if you're a 1st grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher, an 11th grade teacher, what can you walk away with that you might be able to put into action? All right, so I'm going to give a brief project overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul because I know we all want to hear what he has to say. This project overview, these are just some of the specifics. Paul is an 8th grade science teacher, and he has roughly 130 students. I think that number is close to the amount, which seems like a lot to me. The end product of this project is going to be a Google Sites website. The timeline that he has planned for this is about 6 to 8 days. So this isn't something it's a one and done in one class period, but certainly parts of this could be shortened. So it could be less than 6 to 8 days. The tools that we're going to discuss today, using Google Classroom, Google Meet, Google Sites, Google Jamboard, Google Docs, and Google Forms. And the support that Paul received was from me. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Paul now, our special guest, and he is going to talk more about this project that we built together.
Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate it. Yeah, really, from my perspective, when Melanie reached out to me and said that this was something that she was looking to do, I immediately started thinking, as she said, about the times in the face-to-face version of school that we had for so long, where I would have done something much more collaborative. And I had to admit to myself that more recently, the work I've done online has been mostly of that first type, that group work that wasn't truly collaborative. The students were working in groups, but they didn't really need to interact with each other. And I was eager to get them to find ways to connect with one another and to see the value that comes from using everyone's skills together to achieve a common goal. And so I looked at what I had coming up ahead of me in the curriculum, and I chose a particular standard, a learning goal that I have for the students. And you'll see that that learning goal is right there. I'm not going to read it to you, but it comes from the italicized standard from 8th grade science essential standards from the state of North Carolina. Now, one thing that I think is really important is that the students need to know what that target is. They need to understand it, and they need to see it on a regular basis so that they have a sense of where they're going and can develop a certain amount of independence about monitoring their progress and making progress. And so at the bottom of the slide here is the kid-friendly version of that standard, that learning target that I came up with, in this case, with collaboration with my students. So what we're trying to get the students to understand by the end of this project is what is the relationship between mitochondria and chloroplasts. And a little background for those of you that don't happen to be science teachers and maybe don't have a lot of familiarity there. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are what we call organelles. They're small parts of a cell. Chloroplasts are only found in plant and algae cells and some bacteria. Mitochondria are in every cell. And so the kids need to learn what those parts do and how they work together, or, in some cases do opposite things. So we started, and feel free to jump in here, Melanie. We started with the idea that it might be great for the kids to create something in common that together that would show off what they've learned. And because my students, my 8th graders, really love the idea of being creative and often working with analogies and metaphors, we thought, well, what if we have them present these mitochondria and chloroplasts almost like two characters or two people? And by providing a little sort of biography about each one, they would be demonstrating what they had learned about each one. And then at the end, they would talk about the relationship between them, and there'd be a lot of choice involved. We know that choice is so important for all kids. In particular, the kids that I teach are all online right now. I teach in the virtual academy. And so I feel like choice is an even more important role in keeping them engaged.
And I just wanted to add, when we started talking about the learning goal and the relationship between these two parts, we started then talking tools. Well, what tool would be a good tool to showcase these two parts? And what tool are your students as 8th graders ready for? So there's some readiness in the tool. And we came to this tool, Google Sites, for many reasons. One, they were ready. So these students have had experience. They've used Jamboard, which is another tool that they certainly could have used. They've used Google Slides. But they're ready now because they're 8th graders, and Google Sites is where their readiness is. Because for them, I know Paul told me that they have started working on their portfolios, and so they have had some experience, but this will give them more experience, and it's just a way to share their knowledge and their information.
Yeah, that's a great point, Melanie. And that readiness is so important as a teacher because it ensures that I don't have to spend all of my time just teaching them how to use the tool. I can do some of that, but it's balanced with the content learning and the work they're going to do.
All right. So these job roles, when we landed on the end product, we knew that Google Sites was going to be the end product to share their learning. We had to really step back and talk about the collaboration and how would the collaboration work with these students. So together we wrote these jobs, just like any job that you might apply for. And we came up with these jobs: job designer, publisher, job, which is a writer, a researcher, a photographer, and a videographer. And we put these bullet points as their qualifications. So when Paul reaches out to his students and talks about these different jobs, they can look at the qualifications and they can see where their strengths and weaknesses are and what job they might choose. This is a great piece of buy-in for these students because it's almost like they're applying for this job. And so this is their part in the project.
Yeah, and Melanie, I thought you did a great job when you brought this to me as an example of how we could do this in laying out some things that I hadn't really considered, which is by having the teacher's role also defined here. The kids knew what to expect from me as well as me knowing what to expect from them. It's sort of, there's this transparency there within the team and between the team and me that I thought was really powerful. And by bulleting or itemizing each of these jobs, there was really clear when you took on a job what you would be expected to do. And the thing that I love the most is how there's just a little bit of overlap and interplay between different roles. So, it's clear who you need to work with, and that's part of the collaboration piece. You're not taking on a role in order to start a little silo where you're going to work independently on your little piece of the project. You need to continuously interact with the people who are doing other jobs.
And Paul brought up a good point that when he introduces this to his students, that his students might read over these jobs and they might look at them and they might see a job that the project manager or the teacher has missed. And so he is going to give his students the opportunity to reach out to the project manager and suggest another job that they might want to be part of and want to write into this contract. So again, if you were doing this with your younger students, you might have job roles. They might be simplified. There might be fewer jobs. If you're doing these job roles with older students, maybe juniors or seniors in high school, maybe the job qualifications aren't even written. Maybe the students are going to participate in writing the job roles. So you can certainly change the way the job roles look, but I do feel like having these job roles in this contract type form helps that piece of collaboration, so everyone knows what's expected of them in the group. And so working through this project, Paul and I talked about, would there be a place for your 8th graders to brainstorm and take notes in a collaborative place where not only the project manager can see it, but also all the participants in the group can see it. So Paul, do you want to talk more about this piece?
Sure, yeah. So it was important to me that this project really represents not just a learning opportunity, but also an assessment opportunity to see what my students have learned. They're going to have another more traditional assessment that follows, but I wanted this to be a way for them to gain more in-depth understanding of the topic. But I recognized that it had to be preceded by a little bit of front loading or direct instruction where the students would get some basic understanding of mitochondria and chloroplasts. And so those could be provided through notes or live instruction. I will probably make use of videos where the students will use a template like this one to take notes. I did love the idea of having the students go through that front loading or content learning part of the project together, so that they already begin working on those teamwork skills of, if they're all taking notes on the same document, then they're catching things that other people are missing. And knowing my students, my age group that I work with, they're gonna compliment one another a lot, both literally complimenting the work they're doing, but also filling in gaps where things might be missing. And so using a template like this was a great way for them to take notes that would simplify and summarize what they needed to know for the project and give them an artifact, a resource that they could use later on.
This specific example is a Jamboard, and the background of the Jamboard frame has been uploaded. So students could use this Jamboard and simply either put text in those detail boxes or sticky notes. And this could be used for 8th graders, but certainly for our younger students who are their readiness lives in Jamboard, this could be a brainstorming thing where students could even draw in the details. So if they're kindergarten or 1st grade, and then certainly if you were going to do a note-taking collaborative document for older students, they might just use a Google Doc. So there are certainly lots of different ways that students could collaborate with these Google tools. All right, so this takes us back to what happens on a daily basis. What would this project look like? And I'm just going to let Paul go ahead and talk about this synchronous time that you have with your students.
Yeah, so my particular schedule at my school involves a lot of synchronous time on a daily basis with students that mimics a lot of what an in-person class might be like. But I like to build into that independent time for the students to work. And with this project having several days to work on it, I wanted to maximize their independent working time, but still utilize the synchronous time to check in with them. And so the plan is to kick off every day with an overview of what I would like each team to accomplish during that day. they have the freedom to do a little bit more detailed goal setting for themselves. But I would set sort of an overarching goal and maybe a little bit of an update, a little bit of a reminder, here are some things, some checkpoints you need to be reaching or approaching. After I do that and the groups move into breakout rooms in Google Meet to start working, I'd be planning on a daily basis to check in with two different kinds of groups. So for example, every team's photographer, the one who's in charge of finding images for their Google site, I might say, today I want to check in with all of you 5 minutes after the daily overview. And then I would pull those kids out of their breakout rooms into the main room so I could check in with them and make sure that they were understanding their role, that if they had questions or challenges that I could help them with, we could do that, and that they weren't getting stuck on any of the steps that they're responsible for. This also gives me an opportunity when I'm meeting with different roles to help mediate sort of the interpersonal things that might happen within a group. Anytime groups of students work together, they're not all going to be best friends and they're not all necessarily going to get along well. But that's an important part of the collaboration process. And so me being able to step in and see these situations develop and help to work through them was really important. And then I can drop into each breakout room and see each group working and make sure that they had all the tools and resources and answers to questions that they might need. Simultaneously, I can open up tabs, Google Chrome tabs on my computer that look in on the work that each team is doing. So when they create their Google site, in the case of my students, they would, in addition to sharing it with the members of their team, also share it immediately with me. And then I can see live the work that they're making and provide live feedback, encouragement, small bits of constructive criticism when they need help moving through different parts. And that kind of keeps them in the flow of working on the project. And then, as I said, if a group brings to me some sort of issue they're having, I can step in to kind of help with that. I think that's pretty much everything on here, right?
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. So this next slide, Paul talked about these check-ins. The title of the slide is Individual Reflection Options, but this would be a place where Paul could either share this Jamboard or share a Google form where he could do quick check-ins, individual check-ins, because maybe he does check in with the group during a Google Meet. But we all know that sometimes face-to-face and in a larger group, maybe we don't want to share. So this would be another place where he could do his check-ins and grab some feedback from them as the project's moving through the stages.
Yeah, and I love that there's options here that can really relate to the needs of the group of students. My 8th graders can handle a Google form, and because there are so many of them, Google form makes the most sense. At the end of each day, I would ask them to fill in this check-in, let me know how the day went, what they got done, what they need to get done the following day. And because I have that information, when I check in with the groups each day, I can use the spreadsheet generated by the form to actually see whether they're making progress on what they decided they wanted to work on. If I was working with younger kids and fewer of them, then having them fill out a Jamboard would be much more, suitable for them and more feasible for me as a teacher to look at. But with a large number of students, a form makes a lot more sense for me.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up a good point. If you're using it with younger students, let's say I have 25 first graders and you wanted to do a check-in in Jamboard, some of them may just use their finger or a stylus and actually draw the way they feel or their thoughts. So there are definitely some options that Google allow for collaboration. This is the group reflection. So this would come at the end of the project. At the end of the project, the students would come together and they would reflect together collaboratively as a group on their answers on this Jamboard. There's a link to this in our slides, but there are 6 questions, and during the synchronous time that Paul works with them, each group will come together and as a group together answer these questions. And what we talked about is what's great about Jamboard is the information is stored on the Jamboard, and if Paul chose to, he could download it as a PDF and he could share it back with his students. So it was like sort of a packaged review of the information that the students shared and learned together.
Yeah, and I loved when you brought this template to me. I loved the idea. I hadn't really considered it as a way to reflect together. And it gave me the freedom to ask a series of questions that could span all of Bloom's taxonomy. So I've got some simple recall questions that help me see whether they understand the content they're supposed to, and some more advanced sort of inference-based questions that can help me see if the group is able to move and apply the skills they've learned to other situations.
All right, so this takes us to the assessment. So some of you might be wondering, this project sounds great. There are a lot of pieces. I see the collaboration is clear, but what do I do as a teacher at the end? How am I going to assess this project? And that was my question running through this. And I asked Paul the same thing, and he has this rubric that he's going to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, you could use all kinds of different rubrics to score something like this. And it's also important to remember that there is going to be a more traditional formal test or quiz that happens later that will allow each individual student to kind of show their mastery of this content. But when it comes to giving kids feedback on their work, I'm a strong fan, a strong proponent of single point rubrics, which work really well for the age group that I work with. Essentially, instead of describing each quality level for each of the criteria, I describe the met expectations level, which is sort of the A or B level. And then I provide a place where, as I'm looking over the student's work, I can give them feedback about what they did that exceeds that expectation and where they might have missed the expectation and have a chance to make improvements. A really important part of this for me is that they receive this feedback and an opportunity to go back and make their project better. And Melanie did a great job of pushing back and saying, well, you know, it's a group project. When they go back and make improvements, how's all that going to work with their grade? And it's a great question, something that you have to think about. I think for my students, the chance to make improvements might be something that's done on like an individual level, but you can definitely take that, you know, into consideration with your kids and the way that you run your classroom. But I think a single point rubric in general, instead of giving the kids an exact recipe for what it takes to get an A, which I think fences in their creativity too much, I define expectations and let them do things that go beyond.
Thanks, Paul. So if you are interested in this type of rubric, in our slides, there's more information on how and when, how, why you would use this. We also have some resources as well to some Wake County courses on rubric creation. So lots of resources on different ways to assess using rubrics. And that takes us to this project overview, Adaptations. I know we're running short on time. This new 30-minute format is tight for us, but I don't want to miss some of these great points at the end. So hang out there with us for just a few more minutes. If you are not an 8th grade science teacher and you're wondering some things about, I teach 1st grade or I teach 12th grade, what are some things that I can do to make these adaptations to this project? Here are just a few suggestions. If you're interested in a project like this, another suggestion is to meet with your DLC. At the end of this slide presentation, we have a link to our website, and your digital learning coordinators in your area can meet alongside you, just like I met with Paul. And we have content experts, which are you as teachers, and we also have digital learning coordinators who might have some ideas and be able to coordinate those alongside you. This last piece is thinking through an authentic audience. So once this project is complete, who are these students going to share it with? It was another piece in our project Paul and I talked about. How could we make it so that the authentic audience was bigger than just their teacher or their peers? Like, how could we make it so it was more impactful for them to share? And Paul brought up a few suggestions. It could be a teacher in the building or teachers in the building. For his students, he said, I might reach out to the high school teachers, the teachers that they're going to next year in high school, and maybe they could come in and be their audience. You could reach out to community members, or you could reach out to people even broader than that, so other connected audience members. These last few slides, I'm not going to spend much time on them, but they are more of a reference for you. It takes you through all of the different Google tools that we mentioned here today. It will direct you to Tools for All Learners, which is the site that we use in Wake County, which has student and teacher reference cards for you to look at when you're ready. So I am going to go to closer to the end of our presentation. We have the last few slides are project templates. So everything that you've seen that was in this presentation today were created for you to grab and go and use as you want, change. There's some slides on how do I create backgrounds for Google as well. Lastly, we have a feedback form. We would love for you to fill this out for us, to give us feedback. If you're here synchronously and you have time and want to do it now, that would be great. And if you're watching asynchronously, there's an opportunity for you to fill it out during that time as well.
Very important that you fill out our feedback forms, because just as Paul was talking about, timely feedback is really important so that we can make adjustments going forward. So thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you, Paul, for being here with us. It was a great session, and we look forward to more collaborations with you and other teachers in the future.